You make me very unhappy, Penny. And you know what happens to children that make their mamas unhappy. I locked it. I knew that would be the first place you tried to hide.
Child abuse is a controversial yet prevalent issue in our communities, no matter what community you live in. Abuse does not discriminate. Although finances, education, and race are all risk factors, child abuse affects all walks of life. In 2020, there were 126 cases seen at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital. This was 45 more cases than seen in 2019. The month of April is Child Abuse Prevention Month. Prevention is necessary to help people deal and handle situations better to avoid abuse. Prevention is necessary to save innocent children's lives that don't deserve abuse or neglect. Let's talk about the causes, signs and symptoms, and prevention strategies of child abuse. Join us as the Northwest Health Ministry presents Faith Table Talks on April 23rd via Zoom at 6:30 p.m. as we talk with child abuse expert and physician, Dr. Lauren Burge. Tonight, and hearing Dr. Lauren Burge, who is on the call. I want to do a brief introduction for Dr. Burge before she gets started with her presentation. Dr. Burge is a child abuse pediatrician and an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, Tennessee. She is a member of the CARES team at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital and completes medical evaluations of children with concerns of abuse or neglect. She graduated medical school at the University of Texas Health Center in San Antonio and completed her pediatric residency at the University of Oklahoma. She also completed a 3-year fellowship in child abuse pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. Between residency and fellowship, Dr. Burge served 2 years as a general pediatrician, working mainly with foster children and their families. Her interests in the field include community outreach with an emphasis on education and prevention of child abuse. Dr. Burge has participated in numerous presentations, both within the health profession and in the surrounding communities on topics such as the recognition and reporting of child maltreatment and adverse childhood experiences. I would like to introduce you all to my colleague, Dr. Lauren Burge.
Thanks, Anita. I'm going to share my screen. So let's all hope I can do this correctly so you guys can see. Can you guys see what I'm looking at here, my presentation? Excellent. Yes, I also just want to brag on Anissa for a bit. We don't know each other well because I moved here about a year and a half ago. But do you guys know how tough her job is? Like, she has to coordinate that entire trauma department that's full of surgeons who are very smart. They're very busy. And she is always professional and she's always timely. She does a really great job. So I know you guys don't get to see her in her element, but she's a beast in a good way. So thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm a millennial. I'll tell you, I'm 36. So, people make fun of millennials and they say that we're kind of fragile and snowflakes. Maybe we are. But I always like to start any of my presentations just to say that many of you may also be victims of child abuse. Child abuse was in my family. I wasn't a victim, but my mom was. So anything I say or do, I realize may be triggering. That is okay. And so if at any point you want me to stop or pause or reflect or you need to log out, that's okay too. So that's where I'm coming from today. A little background about me. Like Anissa just said, I'm a child abuse pediatrician at Le Bonheur. One of my favorite jobs is being a general pediatrician just for foster kids. And then I'm also a mother. I've got my 2 kids. And then I'm also a believer in Jesus Christ, go to church, went to college in Abilene Christian. So I love the church. And actually, my heart is full listening to you guys interact with each other because due to the pandemic, I've not been able to go to church in person. And then you have young children, it's been really hard. So I can feel the love and support you have with each other, and I love that. So this is the first time I've actually spoken for a church and with a church, and I am actually very excited about that. I've never been able to wed my faith and my profession in one. So hopefully tonight will be exciting. I'm still learning. I know you guys may have stories or experiences that I can learn from, that I want to listen to and I want to validate. So of course, I want to hear all about that. Some take-home points I hope we all get from today is to be able to recognize both physical and sexual abuse, specifically in the church setting. You guys are all brothers and sisters working in the church, going at your home to work. I want you guys to be able to recognize that wherever you are. And then I want to also understand the appropriate reporting mechanisms, as well as to maybe hit some high points on prevention. That's always an important thing to do. I may go kind of quickly today. Anissa told me I have about 25 minutes, so I may be flying through some of these slides. So if anytime you want me to slow down or revisit a topic, I'm happy to do that. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why do we care? Why, as a body of believers, or why as men or women would we even care about child abuse? Well, we know Jesus valued children. He loved children, and there are many verses for that. Here's just a couple. We all know, let the little children come on to me. One of my favorite is when he talks about we must look after the orphans and the widows. That is a part of our mandate. So Jesus Christ loved children, so should we. And how can we serve them? It's by kind of entering into some of these dark spaces and really understanding how sin and woundedness can enter into the lives of these children. Some of you may have seen this movie. It actually won Best Picture in 2015. It's called Spotlight. It is a movie that depicts some of the scandal with the Catholic Church and some of the sexual abuse that occurred there and how it was hidden. And one of the quotes that whenever I heard the actor Stanley Tucci say this in the theater, I almost fell out of my chair. He said, "If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one." And so when I heard that phrase, I thought that is so true, because we as a collective body either tend to overlook or be ignorant about what may happen to a child, or may be afraid or not know what to do for our next steps. So hopefully our little village will be better prepared to recognize that. So before any good lecture, right, in medicine, we always have to talk about numbers and epidemiology. So this comes from NCANS, which is the big national reporting system in the United States. Now you'll notice it's not recent, right? It's from 2019, and they do that on purpose. They fall about 2 years behind because we can't keep our data current, but it comes from like our DCS or CPS reports. So if you look at Tennessee, here are the victims, the number of victims and how we compare to some of the other states. And then here are the percentages. So this is interesting to me because really nationally neglect should be your highest percentage, but that's a whole other topic. Here in Tennessee, it's not, it's physical abuse. Followed by sexual abuse. So these are kind of our top hitters when it comes to Tennessee. And here you can see how we compare to other states. So physical abuse, this is the easy one, really. Most of us know how to recognize physical abuse. This is going to be stuff like burns, bruising, lacerations. Maybe you're working in the children's ministry and you see a strange bruise or pattern injury on a child. You're going to notice that. So let's briefly talk about concerning bruises. So it depends on the age of the child, right? If you, I know Pastor Beard has a lovely 5-month-old, just was talking about his child. If a 5-month-old has a bruise, that is way more concerning than a 10-year-old, right? Because a 5-month-old is not as mobile as a 10-year-old. And then you want to think about wear on the body. So for instance, most normal bruises will occur on what we call bony prominences. So that would be your forehead, your elbow, your shins, your hips. In a mobile child, that's completely normal. So we want to think about the location. The number of bruises, do you have a lot? Do you have a little? Is there a pattern to it? Is there a loop mark, a whip mark? Is there something to it that would suggest it was intentional or inflicted? And then like we just talked about, what's the age and developmental capability of the child? And then what's the story? Maybe the parent has a really good story, but does it fit with that injury? One thing that's really important that I see doctors and non-doctors alike is they try to date bruises. We just can't do it. There's not sufficient evidence to do it. My bruise might look different than Nisa's bruise. So we can't date. So it's just not a good practice to get into. So this is me. You guys may remember the snowpocalypse we had at the end of February. I tried to sled down a hill near my house, and I face planted because I got too much air. So I got a bruise on my face, and my sister-in-law caught it on camera. It was pretty great. But that is really normal bruising. That's a bony prominence, right? I'm pretty mobile. Children can be mobile. So that would all fit. More concerning types of bruises would be bruises in soft, well-protected areas like your neck, your ears. Because think about it. When was the last time that you fell and just bruised your neck? Right? That's just not going to happen. Same thing with your belly. Your belly is soft, at least mine's soft. My belly's soft. So you're not going to be bruising there a lot. So if you see bruises on the belly, on the buttocks, that's another thing. Butts don't bruise. And especially if you're wearing a diaper, like why is your butt bruising unless someone's hitting you with something, right? So an example of that, here's my son with his friends at school. And if you notice, every single one of these little dudes has bruising on their shins and on their knees. So do you guys think that's normal or not normal? It's normal, right? That's good. I love this picture. And then this is my daughter several months ago. She has a bruise on her forehead because she tripped and hit her face on the parking lot. So again, that's normal bruising. Doesn't really get me concerned. These are examples of bruising that would make me a little more worried. Here, this is a child I saw in the hospital who's 3 months of age. The doctors actually didn't catch it until they were admitted, but he has bruising all over his hiney. And his dad confessed to spanking this child. And again, a 3-month-old, right? I mean, 3-month-olds can't comprehend. Spanking a 3-month-old is not going to be helpful. They don't understand what's happening. Here's another ear bruise in a child. And then this is a big belly bruise on a child. So these are more concerning. And all of these children, except for this one, had other injuries. So for instance, when we say it's more than meets the eye, this little baby right here, because we found butt bruising, we went ahead and got an MRI and we found lots of bleeding around his brain, right? So that told us there was more going on. So in the same instance, if you're working children's ministry or a church activity, or you're at your job or you're at home and you notice your child or someone else's child that has bruises in these areas, that's really worrisome. And you need to bring that to someone's attention. And I would hope that person would either be a doctor or you would call DCS yourself. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So other concerning injuries, if you want to be really nerdy, you can flip up the top of your lip in the camera right now and you can look. We all have 3 frenulums under each lip and then under your tongue. When someone hits a face or there's a forcible entry of an object into the mouth, like a spoon, bottle, pacifier, you can rip a frenulum right here, and that's concerning. Same thing with the burst blood vessel in the eye. In children, these are what we call sentinel injuries. These let us know that something else may be going on. And so we worry about that. Because as you guys know, children can't often tell you what happened. And a little baby this age, they can't say, Uncle so-and-so hit me really hard and I'm in danger. They can't say that. So we have to watch out for those injuries. And then pattern bruising. So you see in this little one, this is a loop mark, right? And then he's got a bunch of other little loop marks here. This one, this is a bite mark. Someone bit him. And then these are burns that I think are consistent with cigarette lighters because you light it and it gets really hot and it has that little curve. And so someone was burning him and biting him. And then I don't know if you guys can see, let me move this. There we go. You guys can see this, same thing. This is a loop mark as someone hit on the inside of a child's leg. So that is concerning for inflicted injury. Fractures, I wouldn't think you guys would see this too much, but just in general, if you can't cruise, you don't bruise. That's kind of the saying we have in child abuse pediatrics. And same thing with broken bones. If you're a non-mobile child, why are you breaking your femur, right? You shouldn't be, you're not walking, you're not running. Why are you breaking your femur? So some fractures are more specific and more concerning than others. So for instance, if you have a fracture of your rib, a fracture of your back, a bucket handle fracture, those are all really concerning that we get really worried about things. And so we're going to look a little bit harder. But things like a simple linear parietal skull fracture, we don't worry about that so much. Any kid who falls off a bed or a bench, you know, that's possible for them to get that simple linear parietal skull fracture. So again, we want to know the developmental age of the child, the mechanism, all of that good stuff. And I know I'm kind of trucking, so I apologize, guys. Abusive head trauma is the one that is the most tragic, and it's the one that we see a lot of, the most of. And I know Anissa knows this very well. So we used to call it shaken baby syndrome, but we don't call it that anymore. And the reason for that is when you say shaken baby, it makes us feel like that's the only way a kid gets these injuries. And it's really not. It's not just through shaking. It could be through throwing or a variety of other mechanisms. But what it really entails is the child's head. Little bitty babies have big heads and these tiny little necks, right? And so when their head is being, with acceleration, deceleration forces are applied to it, these bridging vessels, these bridging vessels right here in the brain will break and then bleeding will form. And that's what we see here in the CT scan. This poor kid had an injury and then there's lots of bleeding. And as you guys know, there's nowhere for that blood to go. Your brain is stuck inside the skull. And so then you get swelling, you get herniation, the baby won't be able to breathe on their own. They may require surgery. And that's how these kiddos die. What also happens is they'll get retinal hemorrhages. So your retina is in the back of your eyeball. So in the same way that the head is being kind of sloshed back and forth, so is the eyeball. And so then the vessels in the eyeball will break. And so often we see bleeding in the head, bleeding in the eyes, and then other injuries. And this kills, it's one of the most common ways that a child dies is less than 1 year of age. And it is the most common way of abused children for dies, abusive head trauma. And it can be tricky because, again, a little 6-month-old can't tell you they've been hurt, but they will maybe vomit, be lethargic, really sleepy, or really fussy. And it's hard. Doctors miss it all the time. And that's part of what Anissa and I try to do at Le Bonheur is educate providers to recognize abusive head trauma. I'm going to briefly talk about corporal punishment. And this is such an interesting topic, especially in the church. And we're not going to talk too much about it today, but do some reading on it. And I would love to get y'all's opinion. But corporal punishment is defined this way by the American Academy of Pediatrics. That's kind of our go-to establishment as a pediatrician. And this is their definition. And they define it that way to distinguish it from child abuse. Now, I'm being very personal here. I was spanked as a child. I grew up that way. My dad had it, we call it a spanking stick. And it was like 1 foot long and maybe like 6 inches wide. And he took that puppy in the car on family trips, I remember. And you don't want dad to pull over because he will use that for sure. So this is a statement from the AAP, again, the American Academy of Pediatrics, based out of 2018, where they actually, for the first time in their history, are recommending not using corporal punishment. And the reason why they're recommending that is because new literature has come out that has shown some of the deleterious effects of corporal punishment on children. There's also a lovely book. I'm going to grab it right here, that I would recommend to you guys, because again, I'm not from Memphis, but it's called Spare the Kids. I don't know if you can see this or not. It's called Spare the Kids by Dr. Stacy Patton. And she basically writes about the history and the effects of corporal punishment on Black children and Black families. And I'm a white woman. I don't know anything, right? I read this book and I learned so much, and I was so grateful for that experience, because in all my years in child abuse training, that was never discussed with me. And I think here in Memphis, especially at Le Bonheur, I want to know some of that historical context and that history, specifically Black communities. So again, if you guys want to read it or look into it, I would love to get your opinions. I really, this is a part where I want to learn more from you guys, but take a look and tell me what you think. And Dr. Patton has won a bunch of awards with APSAC and a lot of professional societies, so she's the real deal. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. So in general, in Tennessee, it's not child abuse to spank your child, totally. But what I tell my patients, if you're going to do it in this way, so that you're not going to get in trouble with the law. And that's basically, you have to hit with nothing but your hand. It has to be on the bottom and it can't leave a mark. But officially, as a pediatrician, I don't recommend corporal punishment. And that's a whole nother conversation. Again, I grew up in the church. I love the church. So I always heard this, spare the rod, spoil the child. It's not in the Bible. It's not. It comes from like an old poem called Hudibras or something like that in the 1700s. Now, scripture, they speak a lot about disciplining children. And if you love your child, discipline them. But spare the rod, spoil the child is actually not in scripture. When they talk about the rod, and I know Pastor Beard, you know better than I do. You could give me a scriptural lesson. They talk about the rod as in the shepherd, right? Jesus is the good shepherd. He uses the rod to guide the sheep, not to whack them over the head. So I always thought that was really interesting when I looked into that. So we're going to take a quick right turn. And I'm sorry, Anissa, I'll try to hurry. We're going to talk about sexual abuse, which I think is really important, especially for churches. In my experience as a child abuse pediatrician, I've heard more children tell me stories about how they were victimized either in the church or by someone in the church. And it's because as believers, we are often in these closed settings where we are vulnerable with one another and holding each other up. And so it sometimes can create unsafe spaces for children. And so I really want us to talk about this today. This is Jerry Sandusky. You may remember he was the individual who abused children at Penn State. This is Elizabeth Smart. She was abducted from her home in Utah and for months was sexually abused by an older gentleman. And then here, this is Larry Nasser and Michaela, forget her last name, but she's an Olympian. And so we know all about what happened with the Olympics. The interesting thing is they knew Larry Nasser was perpetrating on these young women, but no one ever reported it to the right people. They always just reported it to their boss, right? So that would be like the Olympic Committee or someone, but never DCS. So if you guys want to dive more into that, Netflix and HBO have wonderful documentaries that kind of break down how sexual abuse can be in an environment and stay there for a long period of time. So you guys may encounter this. A child may make an outcry to you. And when I say outcry, that means they are telling you that something happened to them. So what we know from the research is that when children are sexually abused, they often will not make an outcry until much, much later. So that does not mean they're lying. If they come to you and say, years ago this happened, believe them. What we also know about children is they might not give a complete disclosure. They may leave like a little breadcrumb. And so they may say, hey, Sister Rebels, this happened to me. And it might not be the whole story, just a little bit, because she's testing you. She wants to see how you're going to react before she gives you the whole outcry, right? And if you are safe and protective, then she'll trust you to give you more. So the outcry will be delayed. It might be incomplete, and they might even recant. And they might recant because let's say it happens inside a family and the poor girl sees her mom in the corner crying because maybe her husband was the perpetrator and she's sad because she loves her husband. She misses her husband. She's worried about the bills being paid. She's sad about her family. The other little girl looks over at her sister and her sister is sad because she can't see her daddy and she misses her daddy. And her sister tells, the victim, how could you? It's your fault. Daddy's not here anymore. I hate you. And this poor girl still loves her dad and feels torn. So what is she going to do? She's going to recant. And she's going to say, nope, it never happened. Just kidding. I was making that up. Don't worry about it. So all that is normal and to be expected. So I think it's important for us to know that children will make an outcry, and those are some of those features to look out for. I actually had a little child who didn't tell me that something happened, but she actually drew this on a piece of paper, where later on from a forensic interviewer, she told me she was victimized by her aunt. She didn't know how to tell me, but she drew this. And do you see how she's sad? She doesn't have any arms and she's drawing the pants that are down. And so I said, wow, tell me why this little girl's so sad. And she said, she's not sad. She's angry. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of insight right there. That little girl's very angry. So if you get a picture like this in Sunday school, please don't ignore it, right? Ask more questions. You can call me. You can call Anissa. You can do whatever you need to do, but don't let it go, right? So I think one interesting point, even with Sesame Street, Snuffleupagus used to be imaginary. I don't know if you guys remember that, but Snuffy would show up on set and none of the adults would have seen him and know who he was. The Sesame Street decided to change that. They wanted to make him real because they wanted children to know that they could trust the adults in their life and that they would believe them, right? So I think that's really cool. We need to always believe our children. A quick medical tidbit. There is no such thing as a virginity test. It does not exist. I cannot tell if someone has had sex or not. The way God made the female body was to be resilient and to sustain and heal from trauma. That is why we give birth to babies. And so that's great. So if a child gives me an outcry and I see her in clinic and I check her body and I don't see any evidence that she has had sexual contact, that's great. I still believe her because I wouldn't expect her to have any kind of evidence of sexual contact. So this is an interesting study where they took 36 pregnant teenagers. So we know they've had sex, 36, and only 2 of them had evidence of sexual contact. So I know that's kind of a common myth out there in the lay public, but I just want you guys to know there's no virginity check. That's not a thing. That is a myth. Other myths are that you can get an STI from a toilet seat. That has actually been studied. That's not true. So if someone has a sexually transmitted infection, they got it from someone and it was not okay. And we need to look into that. Okay. These are some other soft signs that something may be going on with a child. So increased aggression, failing out of school. Maybe they're cutting, self-harming. They're not sleeping well. They're wetting the bed when they used to be perfectly potty trained. They're having other inappropriate behaviors, or they're running away a lot. it's worth you asking them. And the way I ask in the medical setting or even in church, I might be like, hey, Jane, I've noticed you've been struggling a lot. Hey, I talked to a lot of kids who've been through what you've been through, and I'm just going to ask you this because I love you and I want to keep you safe. But has anyone ever touched you in a way that made you sad or scared, or in a way that you didn't like or didn't want? And that is just how I started. And generally it goes really well. And if you don't ask, you won't know. And I think a lot of us get really nervous because these are tough conversations. And then we just don't even engage. And that's not right either. So if you want more tips about how to engage in age appropriate ways, I'm happy to have that conversation later. So when you do, if a child does make an outcry to you, please stay calm. But we want to know who did it. Like, for instance, is she going to be safe tonight if she goes home? Like, we want to know who did it, when was the last contact, and where did it happen? And then you need to call CPS and law enforcement immediately. Now, Mississippi's laws are a little bit different than Tennessee's. We'll talk about that in a second. But my take-home point here is don't just handle it internally. Like, you have to call CPS. If someone with Larry Nassar, the Olympic doctor, if they had called CPS, they would have acted earlier. They would have found the child porn on his computer, and he would have been shut down and in prison before he perpetrated it on these young women. Don't ask a lot of specific questions or be judgmental. Don't overpromise. So that means, like, don't say, oh, baby girl, I'll never let him do that to you again. You don't know. It might happen. Try not to get too emotional and realize that the child may very well love their perpetrator, and that is normal. That is okay. Real quickly, normal sexual play. This is one of my favorite tables. I like to draw a line right down the middle here. These are more normal behaviors and these are less normal behaviors. So it's actually normal for a child between the ages of 2 and 6 to do things like touch their genitals, maybe be a little curious about mommy or daddy, want to view that nudity. It becomes less normal when you have, insertive play, behavior that cannot be redirected, that causes anxiety or harm to the child. These are a little more problematic. So if you see a child doing this in the nursery or in a child care situation, it's worth looking into. That might mean calling CPS. That might mean keeping the family close, like asking them a few questions, figure out what's going on. It's worth an evaluation. And as a medical provider, I would want to see that kid in clinic. I would want to make sure there's nothing else going on. So in Mississippi, what the law says, everyone is a mandated reporter. So they go on and on and on and on here about this, but they say, or any other person having reasonable cause to suspect that a child is neglected or abused. So that means all of us by law are required to report. And if we don't report, then it's actually criminal. And that's not great. So if you want to report, here's the phone number. And I'm sorry, Anissa, I failed to provide the Mississippi website. I forgot we're not in Tennessee anymore. But if that child is in direct danger, please call 911 because we don't want them to go home and be in danger. And here's the thing, you don't have to know for sure. That's what a lot of people say is, Dr. Burge, I don't know, and I don't want to cause trouble. Well, good news is you don't have to know for sure. What the law says, you just have to have a reasonable suspicion or reason to suspect, because how could you know? You don't have all the information. So it's okay to report. So when it comes to Mississippi, there's a Romeo and Juliet laws. Every state has them. It's basically the laws about when it's appropriate for young people to have sex, when the age cutoff is. That might not be pertinent for you guys, but it's kind of good. I'll let you guys read over that to know. I apologize, Anissa. This is the Tennessee website. So take home points about this. A report to your boss is not an official report. You must call CPS. Please alert your church leadership. I'm sure Pastor Beard wants to know what's going on in the church, and he needs to know about that. And he also might know a little bit more about the history of the family, some of the stuff they struggled with, some background information. So please share that with church leadership, but don't stop there. You really need to report it to law enforcement or CPS. Important things about sexual abuse, we always think it's that weird person in the white van that pulls up to a child and abducts him. That's just not it. Children are abused by people who know them and love them. These are their family members. These are their friends. These are not strangers. So when you go to birthday parties, holiday events, children are being abused here. So you gotta watch out for it. So in my house, I always tell my 4-year-old, hey, Sam, we're gonna leave doors open always. You have a friend over, cool, door's gonna be open. If you can't keep that door open, then you may not play in your room. You can come out in the living room, but we keep doors open. Now, he's gonna hate that more and more the older he gets, but I don't care. He needs to keep the door open. Okay, I think we've talked a lot about this. Believe the children, promote that culture of safety within your church. And then also something to think about as church members. What are we doing as a body of believers to make it safe for past victims of abuse? Like a lot of us in the church have been abused. And so what language do we use? How available do we make ourselves to people who have been abused, either currently or as children? It makes a real difference. So I'm sorry, Anissa, I know I'm talking a lot. Long story short, if you want to prevent child abuse, I like this slide because I used to think before I was a child abuse pediatrician, it's like, yeah, I'm going to get those perps and put them behind bars. Get them, get the bad guys. It's not like that at all. People who abuse their children often love their children. They just don't know how to love them well. And that's the truth. These are good people who've suffered a lot more than I have, and maybe just don't have those resources or the support structures to get through it. They lose their temper, shake a child, whatever it is. So these people are not always the villains we make them out to be. So these are risk factors for abuse. Again, you guys know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know here. I think it's important, if I may, I'm going to move this around. There's all these risk factors that we see here. But what I think we can do as a community, if we want to prevent child abuse, is focus on the protective factors. So let's say you have a child who, single mom, works 3 jobs. Dad has a mental illness or is addicted to alcohol. That's really bad. But if we have protective factors like a strong faith community or a really great after-school program or a grandma who loves that child, comes to their house, provides them a safe respite, this can actually outweigh some of the deleterious effects of child abuse and can protect this child. So if we can offer some of this support for the community, and as church members, you guys are posed to do this so well. You can offer this respite for these families and for these children and really help prevent child abuse. So this is one of my favorite graphics. I'm sorry, Anissa, I'll go fast. If you think about child abuse and prevention, it's like this huge waterfall where people keep on falling off and dying. Would it be smart to put a sign right here that says danger, waterfall ahead? Absolutely not, because it's too late. These people can't turn around, right? They're going off the waterfall. It would even be stupid to have your rescue boats here, or even why would you have rescue boats down here at the end? Like if you survive, cool, you're a victim of abuse, great, we'll help you through it. Here's our rescue boat. That's bananas. Why would you do that? What you need to do is have these upstream conversations and upstream interventions to help people not fall off this waterfall. So if you have a family who's affected by mental illness, addiction, incarceration, chronic illness, generational poverty, systemic racism, ACEs, food insecurity, all this stuff, if you know that's happening in the house, well then, holy smokes, let's intervene. As a church, I'm going to say this, let's wrap our loving arms around them, invite them to church, keep our eyes on them, pray for them, be engaged, because you can actually keep them from going off the side of that waterfall and abusing their children. They're not bad parents, guys. They're not. They just need someone to show them how it's done. We all know the foster system is broken. That's not great. But if you do have a foster family, great. Support that family. Show them what it's like to parent in a godly way, in a supportive way. This is how you can really prevent child abuse. And then, of course, we look to the great healer, the great doctor, Jesus, right? What did he do? He met people where they were. He went to the woman in the well, been married multiple times. He talked to Zacchaeus, the tax collector, invited him to dinner. He met and with the 5,000 gave him bread. He washed his disciples' feet. He entertained with the adulterous woman and told people to put down the rocks. He healed the blind man. He is active. He is going way above that waterfall and engaging with people all the way around. So this is really, and I can't talk about this in my professional setting, but if we really want to prevent child abuse, it's going to be this way, right? It really is. And we have scientific data to back that up. Like if we can engage with families and do it the right way, it's going to be great. As far as the church, if you guys want to look here at this website, they have lots of resources for churches about how to be informed about victims of abuse, how to be an environment that is safe for children and also past victims of abuse. I haven't looked at it for a long time, but it seems pretty good from what I can see. So check out this website for resources for your own church. The no-hit zone, I'm sure you guys have heard about this. You can make your church or school a no-hit zone, basically where you don't tolerate, public hitting of child to child, child to adult, adult to child, any of that stuff. Also, we have a children's advocacy center here in Memphis. We see and evaluate abused children. LaBonner and Anissa works there. And then here are some books that I have for my own children. And Pastor Beard, this is what some of the books I actually used at Harding for the kiddos. I actually used this one right here. I Said No, and I actually showed it to your daughter and some of the other students about knowing what's good for your body, what you like and what you don't like, and you say no if you don't like it. In teaching kind of those body awareness and body boundaries. Pornography is everywhere, so it's good to start talking to kids now about good pictures, bad pictures, and what's appropriate and what's not. This is another book that has been recommended for churches. These are by the same people that did grace.org that I just showed you. So maybe check this out about, when you hire children's pastors, or you want to make a safe sanctuary for people who have previously been abused. And then here are some more books that I like just as a parent. So what we can do, believe our kiddos, set boundaries for our volunteers and our ministers when they work with children, meaningfully and intentionally surround at-risk families with support, discuss anatomy, consent, and body awareness with their own children, and then really discourage children from giving physical affection if they don't want to. I'm guilty of that. I'm like, hey, Sam, go ahead and give your uncle a hug. And if he's like, no, like, give your uncle a hug, be nice. And, maybe that's not great. We should not encourage that. So I think that is the last of it. Anissa, I'm really sorry I went over time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burge, for your presentation. Great presentation, great information on the signs and symptoms, things to watch for, things to listen for as far as children making statements to us that may be in code, but us learning to listen and be there for them if they do decide to speak with us. At this time, we want to allow for questions to Dr. Burge. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask her, we have her expertise at this time at our hands. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Dr. Burge, that was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much. Could you talk a little more, talk about, you didn't mention it in your presentation, but I'm sure you can talk on it, about sexual grooming with children, and just to let parents know what that is and what to be watchful for, especially with family members. What is sexual grooming?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So grooming is when a perpetrator will get to know a child and endear that child to them, and will usually not abuse at all. Just have them come over, maybe have some candy or play at the pool, or maybe give them special music lessons, because that was one child I saw recently. So they gave guitar lessons, and then maybe they go over for a guitar lesson and they're like, hey, and they put their hand somewhere. And then the child's like, what? And they're like, don't worry, you know me, I wouldn't hurt you, it's fine. And so little by little, they increase that abuse, and it becomes more invasive and more secretive. And so it's never done as like that big, mean, scary. It's little and subtle. It's like, I love you, and I know you love me too. And if you really love me, you wouldn't tell your mom or dad. And so as a mom myself, I want to know who my child is with and why, and the nature of that relationship. And unfortunately, grooming can be done by family members, friends, trusted people. And it's really sneaky. And all the parents I see, they're like, I can't believe that person did that. We trusted them. So that's a really good point. And as parents and as ministers, people who work with children, I think it's always good to know the nature of those relationships. And again, provide that safe space. So if the child wants to make an outcry, they can. And that brings up another point. When it comes to preparing children, we say there are no secrets. There are a difference between a secret and a surprise. So like if daddy's having a surprise birthday, that's good. That's a surprise. But if anyone tells you to keep a secret, we don't keep a secret at all. So if someone tells you to tell a keeper, you come tell mommy right now. You tell mommy. So we start that at a very early age, that it's not okay to keep secrets in case someone who is grooming a child says that.
Thank you so much. So how do parents prepare for that? Like, should we have an ongoing conversation with our children to let them know you can talk, you can open up, you can tell us?
Yes, absolutely. And
What
you know,
age
it is
can
age
start?
appropriate. So you have a 5-month-old, right? You might not be able to do that, but at 5 months, whenever you're changing the diaper, I'm a huge believer in using correct anatomical terms. And the reason is for this, and I'm not being crude, but let's say a child tells a teacher, so and so touched my Cheeto. Okay, well, the teacher's gonna be like, okay, kid, cool. Not understanding that a Cheeto was her private part. So, say I'm changing my 5-month-old diaper. I would say, and my youngest is a girl, I'd be, hey, Reagan, hey, baby girl, mommy's wiping your vulva. God made your vulva. That's your private part, baby girl. And that's a good part. And it's so special. We're going to keep it covered. So you say that maybe every time you change her diaper. So by the time she's 1 or 2, she knows that number one, that is a beautiful part. It's no shame. Vulvas are amazing. God made that vulva. It's wonderful. Number 2, it's private, and we keep private parts private. And then it can kind of move on from there. So say she's Sam's age. Hey, Sam, you know, private parts are private, and we don't touch anyone else's privates, and no one else should touch our privates. And if they touch your privates, you need to come tell mommy right away, because our privates are special and we keep those covered up. So we kind of amp it up a bit. And then when they get to be like a school age, we can say like, hey, buddy, you know, there's some dangerous things out there. And I want you to know that I will never judge you for anything. You will never get in trouble if you come to tell me that something happened to you, because it's my job as your parent to keep you safe and healthy. So you kind of graduate it. But what I see parents do, and I understand this, is we don't feel like we're well equipped to have these conversations. And so we feel like it's one and done, one conversation when you're like pubescent, and then we're good. That's not how it works. And it's not also just about their safety, but how we view godly sexuality, right? We don't want them to be ashamed of their bodies. We want them to have healthy, God-honoring sexual relationships. And so that starts with us talking about their body and talking about sexuality in scripture, and that being a very comfortable, open part of our home, because I don't want anyone else telling my children about their bodies. I want it to be me, right? And so there is no child that is too young to start that conversation. Good
Okay,
question.
one more question. I don't want to bother you anymore, but so as a parent, see, me and my wife, we're real big on our children. So far as social media is concerned, right? Sometimes, we know we live in a state where, they're taking children and sex trafficking and all of that. What would be your professional input or not, or advice on parents on to their children with social media?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I want y'all to know my children are 2 and 4. So any advice I'm giving is strictly from reading a book and reading articles in my practice, not my personal experience. So I have the opinion that I want to delay technology as long as possible. So at my house, we watch TV. We watch all the Disney stuff, PBS Kids, all that good stuff. But I really don't want my son, being 4, to have an iPad or a phone or any of that. And I just want to delay that as long as possible. Just because I also know there's some neurocognitive developmental stuff going on, but I don't want him to accidentally click on something and find something. So let's pretend he's not 4. Let's say he's 12 or 10, and now he's old enough to have an iPad. I for sure am going to use protective software like Safe Eyes. There's so many wonderful ones out there where you have to have a login and a password that will log everything that they do. I will not allow him to look at that alone in his room. If he's going to look at the iPad, he's going to be in the family room or where I can hear and I can see him. Because what will often happen is these children will be online and will innocently get into something, but then they'll come back to it. Because let's be honest, when you view pornography, it releases dopamine. It does. It's pleasurable. So he may accidentally stumble into it, but he might go back to it, right? And that is normal. That is the way God developed us. So we want to try to mitigate that as long as possible. So I would say delay as long as possible. It doesn't, like, there's wonderful programs that are educational and wonderful on iPads. So iPads, don't hear me say iPads are wrong. But for me personally, I want to delay that as long as possible for my boy, because I know pornography is such a struggle, especially in our little boys. So delay, and then have appropriate boundaries to say, if you're going to have iPad time, it's going to be near me or mom, and it's going to be not on mute. It's going to be loud, like I'm going to hear it and I'm going to see it. And then I would have protective software, something like Safe Eyes. So Safe Eyes is what we use at our house. That is pretty good. Good question.
Dr. Burge, do you have any suggestions about things that we could provide at the church? So say an adult or a child is very shy and they probably don't want to say anything. Have you seen it at other churches, or have talked about this in other areas of having some type of safe way to get message or word to someone at the church without them actually having to speak to somebody, like a safe box or safe comment box or something to have where the child or an adult that may not want to say anything in public or to someone, but they can kind of write it down? Have you ever seen that or had any interaction with that?
You know, I haven't seen that. I think that could be a really good idea, but we have to understand at some point that anonymity is going to have to be broken, especially if it deals with the child. Now, with an adult, that's different. We are not mandated reporters for adults. But if someone wants to say something about a child that they're worried about, we have to know who and we have to know what, because we're going to have to report it. And so people, because you guys are leaders in the church, are going to come to you with those concerns, right? And it's going to be very delicate because you're like, gosh, I just don't know. I just don't know. But if you don't know, you have to report. So I think if you want a safe box, that's fine. But then you get in that sticky situation of, I have an anonymous person telling me that abuse is going on with a child. And maybe that's okay. Maybe if you know who the child is, then maybe that would work out, because then you could kind of do your own, investigation and call it in yourself. Maybe you could do that. But then I would say DCS would want that person who saw that to make that report, right? And that report becomes less effective when it's like third order. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I hear you. I'd have to tease that out a little bit. I'll be honest. It's a little problematic, but maybe some of that could be ironed out. I don't know. These are great questions.
Anybody else with any questions? Don't be shy.
I have a question. How would you suggest having a conversation with the child, specifically middle school age, about child pornography? Mm-hmm. That is something that I see quite often, even just working at a middle school, where students are like taking pictures of themselves and they're sharing it with individuals. And so just want to know, what are your thoughts on having that conversation and really just being intentional about being safe when it comes to keeping their private parts private?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Amber, there are lots of books written by really smart people other than me. And if you want to start with good pictures, bad pictures, that's great too. They can start with that. But I think as a middle school minister or a youth minister, I think it's really important in circles of faith for us to be honest about how that is a struggle. So the fact that you're talking about it is the first step. So ladies, young gentlemen, pornography is out there. And the fact that you see it and you like it, that is also normal. That is a normal response. But here's why it is damaging, is that, and then I'm not bringing the science. I don't know if this would be appropriate or not for middle schoolers, where you say, hey guys, when you see that pornography, that's false. A real sexual relationship is not like that. And if you keep viewing that, it is like a drug, and you're going to become numb to where a real human interaction in a relationship will not be as rewarding to you. And it actually has so many poor effects on the growing brain. Porn is just trashes young brains. It's not good at all. And so I think bringing it to the light and then talking about boundaries, right? So if you're a young middle school boy or girl, you struggle with porn, you have really no business having an iPad that belongs to only you, that no one else can watch. You shouldn't have a TV in your room by yourself. You shouldn't have a computer in your room. And so these are tough conversations to have, not only with the child, but maybe the parent, or maybe thinking like, hey kid, you love the Lord, you struggle with this. Let's think of some ways together of how we can set some boundaries for you. Maybe he needs to have a subscription to Safe Eyes, right? Where his parents have the password and they are sent weekly reports of his internet activity, so his parents will know. So I think just talking about it and being open and honest and normalizing it, and then trying to steer away from the shame, right? I grew up, again, I'm 36. I grew up in the 90s. So purity culture was a real big deal. You know what I mean? Like I read the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, like that whole thing. And so there was a lot of shame kind of wrapped into that. So I think as a church, if we as a body can be open about that, but also guide them biblically about what's pure and holy and all that good stuff, I think that's a good thing. So as far as resources, I like Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and there's a junior, and then there's a one for bigger kids that you can look at. That's the one that I've used. There's like every young man's battle. That's another one for, and there every young woman's battle also for girls about keeping themselves pure. But the fact, Amber, that you're even talking about it with your middle schoolers is huge. And I hope their parents are talking about it too. And it might be worth having like a little seminar with like a family chat with your youth and your parents about this problem. So really, sky's the limit, Amber, of how you want to handle that. Did that help?
Yes, it helps a lot. And I really appreciate that. And it's something, like I said, was really concerned about, because not only is it an issue with them seeing it, but some of them are actually sending pictures of themselves as well. Yeah. But yeah, so definitely want to check out those books. Do you mind putting the names? Well, you know what? I'm actually driving right now, but I was just trying to see if I could just get an email or maybe just a text with those books though.
Yeah. Hey, Anissa, can I just send you my PowerPoint and you distribute it however you want? Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So these are a few for like my younger kids. So like my 4-year-old, I have these books at home, and then these right here on the over here are some other good sources for older kids. And if you even were just to Google like Christian literature on certain topics, there's a lot of wonderful Christian authors out there who are psychologists and deal with this a lot more than I do. So there's a lot of great sources out there.
Any other questions for Dr. Burge? Hearing none and seeing none in the chat, Dr. Burge, I want to thank you so much for taking this on. I know this came out of the blue and you're probably like, Anissa, what are you talking about?